Spoiler alert! I finally earned my first 100-mile belt buckle for running the Midstate Massive 100-mile Ultra Marathon. So the Midstate Massive is a point-to-point race that goes from the southern part of New Hampshire to the very southern part of Massachusetts, where it's on the border of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Now, I think this is the only race that you actually hitting 4 states. At one point of this race, you hit a point where the single spot, you're hitting 3 different states: Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. And of course, New Hampshire equals the 4th state. So I don't know if there's any races out there in the country that does more than 4 states in the 100-mile race. If there are, let me know in the comments. So this race has 78 miles of trails, 22 miles of paved roads, and an elevation gain of 13,000 feet, which doesn't seem so bad, except that 50% of that elevation gain is in the first 30 miles. So last year, I tried to attempt 100 miles and earn my first belt buckle. However, the format of that race was a 24-hour race around a 2.5-mile loop, which mentally, that was exhausting. So needless to say, I only made 93 miles in 24 hours. However, in this race, I had 33 hours to complete it. So I was determined to make it. So the start of the race was great.
Oh, that's a good sign.
Yes, being the key word, yes.
By the time I reached my first crew-supported aid station, which is about 28 miles from the start line, I was an hour ahead. And the reason for that is that I joined a group where we really pushed ourselves for at least the first 25 miles. However, it did take a little bit of a toll on myself because remember, the first 30 miles is where most of that elevation gain is. And strategically, I was going to run those a little slower than the rest of the race. However, it turned out that I ran it a lot faster than any other parts of the race. So it took a toll on my quads. In fact, at about 20 miles, my quads started cramping.
It's about mile 22. I'm a little nervous because I guess I'm hitting the hills a little too hard. And I was going in a group with a really good team of runners, and now my left thigh and my right calf are seizing up a bit, and nothing seems to work except slowing down. So I'm just gonna slow down a bit and take it easy for a while.
So I downed a bunch of soap pills and electrolytes, which I think helped me a little bit. But I also started feeling nauseated, so I had to make sure that I was eating food while I was running. At mile 28, I finally met up with my crew.
My bladder is completely empty. I need that full. My water canteens are pretty good because I filled them up at dental.
Yeah.
But my mouth is dry as hell from
Yeah.
from just drinking electrolytes and no water for the last like 3-4 miles. 10 miles ago, my muscles started twitching pretty badly.
Salt maybe?
I've taken 6 pills already,
Yeah.
but I think I need like salt food and stuff like that. However, my legs and everything feel great. Like
Okay.
very little fatigue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was me and Igor at Wachusett at mile 28-ish, and I was a little worried about him, to be honest, because he might have thought he was doing great, but I was worried about how he was looking, and I texted Justin, and I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm a little nervous here. It's not looking great. So I was nervous at mile 28, but Igor rallied.
There, I got a little bit of a rest time because this was right before I was gonna hit Mount Wachusett, which is a 2,000-foot mountain. And that was a place where I could have a little bit of a breather. However, the expectation was that I was just gonna spend about 10 minutes there. It turned out to be a little bit over 15 minutes. I also ate a spicy salami, which gave me a little bit of acid reflux and made me feel a little nauseous. However, I drank a little bit of my bone broth that I brought with me, and that felt great. And then I was able to tackle Mount Wachusett and climb over it down before nightfall, which is great because on the way down it was pretty treacherous. And Mount Wachusett was the last big climb until the race fairly got flatter. I mean, there were still places where we had to climb, but not as much as we had to do it in the first 30 miles, like I said previously.
Update at 35 miles, past the hardest parts of the race, which were the first 30 miles of a lot of elevation gain. About 50% of the whole race is in the first 30 miles. The biggest mountain was Wachusett. Past that during the day, so that's good. We don't have to climb down. That was a pretty hairy climb down. And now we're on the road, kind of like farmland. Still a little cramping, trying to keep my cramping under the control. So not taking it too hard, but also trying to take advantage of this road. So gotta start.
So the next station where I would meet up with my crew would be at the 50-mile aid station. So I had 22 miles to go until I see my crew again. Between miles and 30 and 50, that's when it turned into night. I had to put on my reflective stuff. It was all solo running. It was interesting once the darkness hit. People were starting to get lost, especially if they don't have the watch like I do, the Coros Vertex 2, which the battery life feels like forever. However, people were running out of battery life and people were using their cell phones to try to figure out where they are. And it became a little bit of comical because people were getting lost left and right on this. So once I got to the 50 miler, that was the first place where I was allowed to have a pacer. So my first pacer had massive experience. He actually ran this race, the Midstate Massive, as his first race about 5 years ago. And my pacer also paced somebody for this race as well. So my first pacer had tons of experience, and we went out in the dark after the 50 miles.
So I went in as with that commonly known principle, the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. So just going in, thinking two main things, mental and physical for you. So mentally, just be that lighthouse of enthusiasm, just engage with you, make sure you're okay mentally. Then physically, just keep you moving forward. So we're progressing. And then if there was an opportunity to push you a little bit to get you going, I was going to do that. But I wasn't going to overcomplicate the strategy. It was more just your primary objective was to finish the race, get your first buckle, which you did. And then I was wanted to be there for you in that journey to make sure you could do it.
It was great that I had a pacer between 50 and 74 miles because my left knee started to act up. In fact, I had to kind of run a lot of times. A lot of walking for sure, but that's what ultramarathon is all about. It's not always just running all the time. So my first pacer kept me going up to the 74-mile aid station. That's where my pacers switched off for a more of a newer individual who has never paced before or who has never crewed. But it was his idea to pace me for this race. So why not? In fact, this individual paced me for the next 26 miles and he did an awesome job.
For selfish reasons, because I want to do this race next year. So I wanted to get the kind of experience of the race before I ran it so that I was more prepared. So I get to see a lot of the course by crewing and by running like recon runs with you leading up to the race. So that was kind of like selfish reasons. And the other reason is because my brother and I wanted to be there when you got your first belt buckle, and I wanted to be a part of it, like the whole thing. So I wanted to see you get your first buckle. So that's why. My strategy was to get you to the finish. And at that point, like when you came into mile 74, I'm like, you're finishing. You knew it. Like I could just sense it on you that you were committed. But I've been at mile 75 in an ultra and I dropped out. So which is embarrassing to admit, but I've been at mile 75 of an ultra and dropped out. So I'm like, I'm not like, no matter what, like we're getting that buckle. Like that's the goal here. That's what we're doing. I don't care if we got to crawl. We're crawling to the finish. Like that was it. So then it adapted in the last 25 miles because you would move like you started running. You know, like I would just try to hold the pace that you were going for 2 or 3 minutes, and then stop and walk for 5 or 10 minutes, and then run, like just to keep you moving. And I was like really impressed actually from at the start there, like the mile 75 to 80. I think you were doing like 11, 12-minute miles there for like a few miles, which was killer. And then obviously we slowed down to like a 16-minute pace, but so it changed like as we got closer to the finish, and then it was just keeping you moving. That was it.
He kept me on track, he kept me on pace, and I finally ran through the finish line in 27.5 hours.
Let's walk a bit from Rhode Island. step number 85, 100 miles. Look at you go. Welcome to the finish line.
Like watching you cross the finish line, man, that was. I was more weirdly like more like gratifying watching you get that buckle than it was like when I got mine. It sounds a little weird, but it was.
So I'm satisfied with my first 100-mile race, and it felt great. So the whole time I was running, I never thought about quitting. And it wasn't as mentally exhausting as I thought it would be, because the terrain is always changing. So you're always thinking and what's going on. You're always looking at your footing, especially on trails, to see where you're going. So what's next for me? I'm running the JFK 50, which is the oldest ultra marathon in the country. It's been running continuously every year since 1963. And I'm really excited about it because it's in Maryland and some of it is on the Appalachian Trail. However, my knee is still bothering me. So I'm hoping just to make that 13-hour cutoff time. I hope I can make it. So stay tuned.
Like and subscribe.